also say, I thought I heard you say that losing your health wasn't one of the things that's worth being afraid of.
Right. In other words, if you can maintain your health in a skillful way, go ahead and maintain it. But if you have to lose it for some other, for some sake, and you can't help it, then say, well, that's not nearly as bad as losing my virtue or my whatever, right view. Because there are times when you have to stick with your precepts, and it's going to mean a loss of some kind or another, and you have to say, okay, I've got to put up with that loss, because I don't want to lose the precepts. This is when precepts get demanding, and a lot of people want to fudge. In other words, in the long term, you're not losing. You've got to keep that in mind. Okay, being unburdensome. I skipped over shedding. Let's go back to shedding for a bit. This great story, 3.5. It's quite long. The most dramatic points are this. One king and his wife have been driven out of their kingdom. They get disguised, they go and they live in the capital city of their enemy, disguised. And the wife gives birth to a child. Now they realize the child is in danger, so they send him out to live with relatives out in the countryside. And one day he happens to come in to see his parents, and it so happens that his parents have been turned into the king. Then the thought occurred to Prince Dikavu, that's the name of the child. It's been a long time since I saw my mother and father. What if I go to see them? So he entered Varanasi and saw his mother and father bound with a stout rope, their arms pinned tightly behind their backs, their heads shaven bald, being marched to a harsh-sounding drum from street to street, crossroads to crossroads. So he went to them. King Dikadi, that's his father, saw Prince Dikavu coming from afar, and seeing him said, "Don't, my dear Dikavu, be far-sighted, don't be near-sighted. For vengeance is not settled through vengeance, vengeance is settled through non-vengeance." When this was said, the people said to him, I get chills reading this story, "This Prince Dikadi has gone crazy, he's talking nonsense. Who is Dikavu? Why is he saying, don't, my dear Dikavu, be far-sighted, don't be nearsighted, for vengeance is not settled through vengeance, vengeance is settled through non-vengeance." And so, at any rate, they marched the parents out, evict them out the south gate of the city, and there to the south of the city, cut them into 4 pieces, buried them in holes, placed in 4 directions, stationed guards, and left. So the prince goes into town, gets some liquor, gets the guards to drink it. When they got drunk, he collects sticks, made a pyre, raised the bodies of his mother and father out of the pyre, set fire to it, and then circumambulated it 3 times with his hands raised in salutation. Now at that time, King Brahmadatta, that's the enemy king, had gone up to the terrace at the top of his palace. He saw Prince Dikavu from afar, circumambulating the pyre 3 times with his hands raised in salutation. And seeing him, the thought occurred to me, doubtlessly this person is a relative or blood kinsman of King Dikadi. Ah, how unfortunate for me, for there's no one who will tell me what this means. So the prince goes into the forest, cries and weeps as much as he needed to, and he dries his tears and enters Varanasi. Going to an elephant stable next to the king's palace, he said to the chief elephant trainer, "Teacher, I want to learn this craft." So the teacher takes him on. So he plays his lute in the king's stable. The king hears it and calls him in. "I'd like you to play the lute for me." So he does. You can see what's happening. He's planning his revenge. And the king he plays it with a sang a sweet voice and played the lute. He says, "I say, young man, you are to stay and attend to me." "As you say, Your Majesty," Prince Dikavu replied. Then he rose in the morning before King Brahmadatta went to bed, in the evening after him, did whatever the king ordered, always acting to please him, speaking politely to him. It was not long before King Brahmadatta placed the prince close to him in a position of trust. So they go out hunting one day. And so the prince drives the chariot in such a way that it separates him from all the other people in the king's entourage. And so the king says, "I will say then, my young man, unharness the chariot, I'm tired, I'm going to lie down." Responding, "As you say, Your Majesty." He unharnessed the chariot and sat down cross-legged on the ground. Then the king Brahmadatta lay down, placing his head on Prince Dikavu's lap. As he was tired, he went to sleep right away. Then the thought occurred to Prince Dikavu, this King Brahmadatta has done us great harm. He has seized our troops, vehicles, lands, armories, and granaries. It was because of him that my mother and father were killed. Now is my chance to wreak vengeance. He drew his sword from his scabbard, but then he thought, My father told me as he was about to die, don't, my dear Digamo, be far-sighted, don't be nearsighted. For vengeance is not settled through vengeance, vengeance is settled through non-vengeance. It would not be proper for me to transgress my father's words. So he put his sword back in the scabbard. But then he gets overcome a second time and a third time with his desire for vengeance, but then puts the sword away. Then King Brahmadatta's son gets up, frightened, agitated, unnerved, alarmed. Prince Digamo said to him, Your Majesty, why have you gotten up suddenly, frightened, agitated, unnerved, and alarmed? I say, my young man, just now I was dreaming. Prince Digamo, son of Dikadi, king of Gosla, struck me down with a sword. Then Prince Digamo, this is where it gets dramatic, grabbing King Brahmadatta by the head with his left hand and drawing his sword from its scabbard with his right hand, said, I, your Majesty, am that very Prince Digamo, son of Dikadi, king of Gosala. You have done us great harm. You have seized our troops, vehicles, lands, armories, and granaries. It is because of you that my mother and father were killed. Now is my chance to wreak vengeance. So King Brahmadatta, dropping his head down to Dikadi's feet, said, Grant me my life, dear Vigo, grant me my life. Who am I that I would dare grant life to your Majesty? It is your Majesty who should grant life to me. In that case, my dear Digamo, you grant me my life, and I'll grant you your life. So they granted one another their lives, and taking one another by the hand, swore an oath to do no one another no harm. So then he go back to the city together, and he calls the ministers together, and he says, I say then, if you were to see Prince Digamo, the son of Dikadi, the king of Kasi, what would you do to him? Different ministers said, we would cut off his hands, your Majesty. We would cut off his feet, your Majesty. We would cut off his hands and feet, your Majesty. We would cut off his ears, your Majesty. We would cut off his nose, your Majesty. We would cut off his ears and nose, your Majesty. We would cut off his head. Then the king said, I say, this is Prince Digamo, son of Dikadi. You are not allowed to do anything to him. It was by him that my life was granted to me, and it was by me that his life was granted to him. So he turns to the prince and says, what did your father mean when he said that? What my father said to me was about to die. Don't be farsighted means don't bear vengeance for a long time. When he said to me, don't be nearsighted, don't be quick to break with a friend. For vengeance is not settled through vengeance, vengeance is settled through non-vengeance. My mother and father were killed by your Majesty. If I were to deprive your Majesty of life, those who hope for your Majesty's well-being would deprive me of life. And those who hope for my well-being would deprive them of life. In that way, vengeance would not be settled by vengeance. But now I've been granted my life by your Majesty, and your Majesty has been granted your life by me. And this way, vengeance has been settled by non-vengeance, and what my father was saying to me as he was about to die. So the king gives his Dikadi his daughter in marriage. Then the Buddha goes on, he's talking to the monks. Such is the forbearance and gentleness of kings who wield the scepter, who wield the sword. So now let your life shine forth so that you, who have gone forth in such a well-taught Dhamma and Vinaya, be their equal in forbearance and gentleness. Quite a story. Yeah. And to put it in context, the monks at this particular monastery had got into a quarrel. One of the monks had gone to the bathroom and had to flush the toilet. Or the ancient version of flushing the toilet. And so this Vinaya expert goes into the bathroom next and comes out and says, hey, you didn't flush the toilet. And the other one says, I'm sorry, I forgot about it. And so the Vinaya expert says, okay, then it doesn't matter. And then the Vinaya expert goes over and tells his students, you're that dumb Dharma expert over there. He thinks he knows the Dharma, he doesn't even know enough to flush the toilet. Well, word gets over to the students on the other side, and they're saying, yeah, I thought you said it was okay, it didn't matter. So they start squabbling, and then I guess they don't talk to one another. And so the Buddha calls them in and tells them this story. I mean, this is nothing to do with flushing toilets. This is my parents have been murdered. I can still forgive you for that. So it's good to remember these. You notice a lot of these stories in the canon are fairly extreme, and the purpose is you remember them. Bandits cutting you limb from limb with two-handled saws and that kind of stuff. It's for you to keep that in mind, so you keep your own troubles in the course of the day in perspective. So that you can shed your pride over, this person had insulted me and I can't let him get away with that. It's not worth it. Any questions on that one? Getting late in the day. Finally, one last passage on being unburdensome. The story goes, these monks got into a contest to see who had the nicest hut. This hasn't stopped, you know. it got to the place, what's the line here? People harassed with the begging, harassed with the handing, on seeing monks would feel apprehensive, alarmed, would run away, would take another route, face another direction, close the door. Even on seeing cows, they would run away, imagining them to be monks. So the word finally gets to the Buddha. And the Buddha goes and he rebukes the men, he rebukes the monks. And then he tells them several stories. One is about two hermits who live next to the river. And one of the hermits is being visited by a naga every day, and it's kind of unnerving him. And so he goes and he complains to the other hermit, and the other hermit says, well, do you see that he has anything valuable? And the first hermit says, well, he has this crest jewel. There's a belief that nagas have a jewel right here. He said, well, next time you see him, ask for it. And that's enough to drive the naga away. And there's another story about a monk who's living in a forest, and this big flock of birds comes and settles in every night, making a huge racket. Goes just so that they see the Buddha complaining. And the Buddha says, do you want those birds to go away for good? Yes, Lord, I want them to go away for good. Then go back there, enter the forest, and in the first watch of the night, make this announcement 3 times. Listen to me, good birds. I want a feather from everyone roosting in this forest. Each of you give me 1 feather. In the second watch and the third watch of the night, make this announcement 3 times. Listen to me, good birds. I want a feather from everyone roosting in this forest. Each of you give me 1 feather. The monk did as he was told. Then the flock of birds, thinking, the monk begs for a feather, the monk wants a feather, left the forest. And after they were gone, they never again returned. Monks, begging is unpleasant, hinting is unpleasant, even to these common animals, how much so more so to human beings. Okay, this is, the lesson of the Dhamma talk. And nothing turns people off as much as a Dhamma talk. So, you don't go around begging. And you try to make yourself unburdensome so you don't have needs to get this person, get that person. There's a passage in the Karunaniyametta Sutta, the Sutta on goodwill, where the Buddha says one of the factors of having goodwill is that you don't have a lot of projects. Because you have a lot of projects to do, you can think of it, this person could help you with that project, this person could help you with that side. You don't really see the human beings there. All you see are beings to your hand. So you have to live as simply as possible so that you can actually communicate with people, just in terms of what they really need. This is one of the advantages of being unburdensome. Questions on that? Okay, well, we've talked about these qualities for recognizing the Dhamma. As you notice, we skipped over a lot in the book. But I think we've covered the main issues. As I said earlier today, the primary issue is that when you're looking at the Dhamma, remember it's not just a one-word practice. There are lots of qualities you have to develop, and you have to think about your practice in terms of, is this going to the right goal? And also, how is it going to affect the people around me as I practice? You're not here to show off to other people. You're not here to make yourself burdensome to other people. You're here to focus on cleaning up your own mind in a way that doesn't create unnecessary problems for other people at the same time. So there's making it an all-around skillful practice and not just a one narrow-minded kind of practice. So that's all for the day, unless you have any last questions.
I do have a question about that last passage. I think one of the things I've heard, we just had an annual meeting and it came up again, but it's been a recurrent thing, is that at Friends of the Dhamma we're extremely bad at talking about our support, and so it gives people the impression that there's some sort of
magical support.
Yeah, and I think it's in reaction to that understanding that we don't want to burden people, because I do truly want this place to be a gift to people who that would burden them to think of support. But that also means that we don't talk about support, which seems to be going too far. So I'm wondering how we avoid that kind of misunderstanding that.
Well, you can put a sign up at the back that says, "We need help." But leave it up to people to respond.
Yeah.
There's nothing as bad as someone, buttonholing somebody. And saying, we need your help, specifically in this way. But it's perfectly okay to say, okay, just put up your, this is the amount of money that we have left, and we don't have to pay off. This is the amount of money that we're getting every year, whatever. And let people do the math on their own. Don't use flashcards.
Use flashcards?
Don't use flashcards. see, this is where you're heading, right? How far can you push the monk? I mean, it's okay to let people know that there are financial needs, and you can be, put out the math on the back. And I must say, don't expect that there's going to be a group of wealthy people in Thailand that want to pay off a lay practice center in Portland. So you do have to depend on people around here. But, just put up the notice. That's it. Because nobody likes to feel pressured. But they do want to be informed. And if they were to find out, if I don't help, this place is going to sink in a year or so. And they'd say, gee, I know I'm getting something good out of it. I want to help. You do have to trust on people's goodwill. You can inform them, but leave it at that. Those are my teacher's recommendations. You inform people that something good is going on. If they'd like to help, we're happy to get their help. And you can inform them that this is how much we're lacking. But you don't want to put the screws on so and so, saying, "Oh, we want this much out of you, we want that much out of you." And that way you can let them figure things out. Because the whole point of generosity is that it comes from your sense of, I want to give to this group of people. Not that I'm getting pressured to give. Okay, well, thank you for your attention.
So just so people know, actually, I've done